Well, welcome everyone. Sorry for the little technical difficulties. My name is Kirsty Boyette, and I have the privilege of being the executive director of the historic nonprofit mission-driven State Theater, which opened in 1934. We've got a beautiful new theater right next door, of which we haven't been able to do anything with, obviously, because we're closed. So we thought we'd get creative during this crazy times and try to reinvent the opportunity and try to make the State Theater still stay relevant and to our community and friends near and far. So I'd like to welcome all of you. I enjoyed this movie. This is our 7th virtual educational seminar, and I've really enjoyed kind of thinking outside the box on all these films, and our presenters have done a great job of doing the pre-film talk for 30 minutes or 40 or 50, and they take a lot of time to work on those. So I want to thank Arnold and Randy and Larry. This is Larry's first time doing a virtual educational seminar. Randy and Arnold have done a few, and we really appreciate the time that goes into this. I mean, it's a lot of work, and the research and the recordings, and I really appreciate your time going into these. It's a little shout out to a couple things. I'm going to be sending you all a little survey and kind of give us feedback on your event, on how the event worked. This one was a little different. It was a Monday to Monday because Arnold has class on Thursday afternoon or evening. So we appreciate you kind of adjusting for that. And then there's another one coming up on the 19th, which is the movie Election. And again, it'll be similar format. It'll be Monday to Monday. We are, again, trying to stay relevant in our community. We have shifted gears. We're doing popcorn sales every Friday night from 3:30 to 6:30. Our community has been very, very supportive. And we have the best popcorn in town.
Are you still dressed as a giant popcorn box?
Dressed up as a giant popcorn, and I appreciate that.
It's worth it just to see that, I have to say.
Yeah, I love
it. Modesto. We have pictures.
Yeah, and believe it or not, we've raised $40,000 in popcorn sales, and 18,000 of that is in just donations, which shows obviously the quality of the amazing popcorn, but number 2, how generous our community is, and really really reaches out and supports us. We're also doing drive-ins this weekend. We've got Goonies and the movie 42, which is highlighting Chadwick, I can't remember his last name, the young gentleman that passed away recently. And so we've got that. We've got a whole season of drive-in movies at John Thurman Field going all the way through November 7th. So it's very exciting that we can kind of think outside the box during these crazy times. And then when we are able to reopen on a limited capacity, we'll be opening for private rentals. So you and your family of 10 can come rent your favorite, just show your favorite film. It could be your family videos, or it could just be whatever you want. And we'll open concessions. You can do the Jewel for 6 people. So we're trying to be creative during these crazy times. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Randy. You want to get this party started?
Absolutely. And remember that 42 was Jackie Robinson's number, Dodgers. Go Dodgers. So I'm Randy Siefkin. I taught political science at Modesto Junior College for 31 years and been retired for a while. And one of my passions is serving on the State Theater Board of Directors. So I'm frequently referred to as the old movie guy plus the state's historian. So you can ask me things like, what was the first movie playing at the state in 1934? And I can answer that question, but you'll have to come by and see it. I think it may be on our website. With me is my partner in crime, 2 partners in crime, Larry Givender, emeritus from Cal State University Stanislaus, political science teacher, and co-host of the Randy and Larry show on local television way back in the days, I think around 2000, wasn't it, Larry? Something.
That was 2000 was our last
our last,
Yeah, but for
our
several
last-
general elections before that, we were providing live election returns and beating out the networks out of Sacramento in reporting local results.
The first one was the Lincoln Douglas one, wasn't it? It's
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, almost. Yeah.
It feels like it was not that long ago. And one of our co-presenters and activists on the virtual reality education front, Arnold Schmidt, who is currently a professor of media and what do we say?
I teach British lit and film and creative writing and pretty much, everything.
All kinds of other thing and sees films in a very different way than I do and most political scientists, I think. So we are willing to answer your questions. And if you don't have any, we have a few questions that we will lob at each other. But do we have any questions from the audience that we want to start with, Kirsty?
Yes, before I forgot my little housekeeping thing. So this is a webinar. The faces aren't there, but if you want to ask a question, you can put it into the Q&A along the bottom. Sorry, I hit myself. You can put it in the Q&A along the bottom and I will read them. Or if you want to ask it yourself, just let me know and I can release the video. So we have one comment already. Hold on, where'd it go? Oh, there's Q&A on the top. Okay. Ken White is saying, Robin and I love the film, especially, everyone should see it, especially in this turbulent political times. A question, but thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. Alan, do you want to ask one of the questions that you had? Alan?
I was going to say that people might find it useful, viewers might find it useful if you haven't done so to go back and look at the state's website at the introduction that the three of us did for the film, which provides a good deal of background on the actors and the themes of the film. So I would recommend that to you. It runs about 35 minutes or so, and it provides, I think, sufficient context for the film. So don't miss out on that.
Oh yeah, if anybody's seen it, we'd really appreciate your feedback on what you thought of those presentations.
And yeah.
So
So here's a question. In the introduction to the film, Arnold noted how Capra used camera angles to emphasize Jimmy Stewart's character, Mr. Smith. Could he elaborate a bit on how Capra uses these and lighting techniques to reveal these characters?
Yeah, I have to say, it's one of the things, I've seen the film a number of times and I hadn't watched it in years. And so sometimes when you watch something again, you start seeing other things. But one thing I did notice is that for the whole first half of the film and almost to through the first 2/3 of the film, until Jimmy Stewart starts really like losing, during the filibuster, losing his strength, we're really looking up to him a lot. A part of it is he's apparently very tall, and he's next to people and he just looks like a giant all the time. But if you look at there's a couple of sequences at the Lincoln Memorial, and we look up at Lincoln and we look up at Jimmy Stewart, I think in the same way. And I think that's supposed to be linked in some way in our minds. We're supposed to see them in the same way, that Stewart is the reincarnation in a sense of that kind of political idealism. And what's interesting is there's moments when he's in a dialogue, a confrontation with Claude Rains, with the kind of, the kind of noble senator who's now corrupt. And those sometimes go up, sometimes we're up in Claude Rains's face and sometimes we're down. And I think it's really an interesting way to think about it. I mean, typically, when film theoreticians talk about this, in some ways it's, you look up to tragic heroes and you look down on comic figures. So there's that kind of idea. But I think it's really interesting in this way. And it seems to be him more than other characters.
Yeah, he is 6'3". I think Raines 5'9" or 5'10", maybe with lifts.
Yeah, they never cheat that boy.
I found the set design very fascinating. That film was not filmed at the U.S. Senate. Rather, the sets were totally recreated to scale on a soundstage in Hollywood, but keeping the dimensions of the Senate chamber true created very difficult film angles for Capra, and the lighting was difficult.
Yeah, I think the lighting would be really difficult. It's an enormous set. It's really big. And I have to say, a lot of those shots, you see most of the set. A lot of times, there's a big shot, there's an establishing shot, and then we stay close on people and you can kind of cheat it. But this is big. It's really something.
He had on staff, he had the secretary of the Senate as an advisor, apparently, so that everything was copacetic, I think, except for the clock, which had a lock on it or didn't have a lock on it. I don't recall. Do you recall the story of that? There was something about there was no lock on the clock in the Senate chamber because they could move the hand.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Yes, to keep the Senate in session and claim that it was not the time that it was. Yeah. The other interesting thing I thought, and I ran across this factoid and I hadn't really thought about it, but if you look at the costuming, Stewart is always in a dark outfit, and most of those around him are in gray, more gray, less idealistic, I guess, outfits. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of the film as well.
Cool. And I see that I think Donna has a comment. Oh, hold on. Oh, sorry. Chat. Okay, there's a couple of comments. Donna Riley, I very much enjoyed the pre-talk. I thought it made the movie even more interesting. And then Alan has a question. One observer stated that the film seems dated and sappy, and that Jeff would be left out of town today, much like the media tends to portray Southern lawmakers today. Yet the film strikes familiar themes. That's more of a chat. Sorry, that was a question.
It's an interesting point, though. I mean, one of the things, and I know that the state has my cousin Vinny coming up, but one of the areas when we think about films that represent groups of people, whether they're people of color or ethnic groups or women or LGBTQ, however we want to kind of think about that, one of the things to think about is the way films represent the American South. We have Deliverance, we have All the King's Men, there is this kind of image of what is the American South. Not necessarily, I don't mean Civil War, but I mean post, and there's certain, I think, kind of stereotypes with that. And this is kind of, at least in some ways playing with that notion, the corruption, the gentility, right? They're very polite, very genteel, very mannered, but it's very affected. They're going to smile and stab you in the back. It's in some ways, it's really interesting.
One point that I edited out of my presentation, as long as we're referring to the South, in several points in the film, Smith refers to his behavior and that of his father as the lost cause.
Right.
Or the lost cause is the defeat of the Confederacy.
Right.
Which is a strong theme in the southern states. And it is ironic that was placed in the dialogue of the film.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm totally off topic, but when I was in graduate school, I went to Vanderbilt in Nashville, and so I went to a party with a bunch of grad students, and I walked in, I didn't really know anybody, and I was like, listening to just some different conversations, and I heard people arguing about the war, and I just assumed that it was the Vietnam War, and they said, no, it's the War of Northern Aggression. So
still fighting.
Still with us.
Are still with us, yes, even today. Do either of you see any evidence of political bias in this film? I mean, Capra is sometimes regarded as a populist, but it turns out he was probably a pretty conservative Republican, as was Jimmy Stewart. Do you see any evidence of that? And you see the film slanted in any direction politically?
Not in terms of our how we conventionally define Democratic and Republican politics today. I think we may have seen other political dimensions in the film that reflect the bias of Capra and principally the screenwriters.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's certainly not a left-right kind of divide. I do think there's a sense of populism here, the little guy against the big guy, and the big guys are all in it. And whether it's corporate or political, that's the danger. Capra is interesting because he has these kinds of very populist films like, Even Wonderful Life, against the bankers and all that. But he's against the New Deal. He really is a kind of an individualist in that way. However you want to kind of think about that. But I do think that there is this earlier tradition, and I mean, you guys can talk about this really from the late 19th century into the early 20th century, but this tradition of American populism, I will not crucify mankind on a cross of gold. And I mean, he reminds me of that strand. And I think there's tremendous
William Jennings Bryan.
Yeah, I think there's sincerity. I think he believes it. And in that's the political dimension that I see, is the sincere versus insincere rather than left and right.
The one thing that I thought was, as much as the film could present it fairly true to accuracy, was the power of a political machine that dominated the media at the time and controlled key political institutions. The media at the of the day, of course, was the radio and newspapers, as well as what I quote termed influencers in my presentation, which would be spokespeople at particular organizations. If one can control those folks by intimidation or coercion or by incentives, look how that can totally dominate the political life of a society. That was political machines near the turn of the century, 1800s and 1900th century.
So do you see the equivalent of that today?
No, I don't see it today, but at the time of the film was written and made, political machines were alive and well prior to World War II. Yeah,
that would be left and right too, right?
New York. In many parts of the country, and they were all.
Well, there were some Republican bosses too. Machines. Yeah, there were a few, not quite as many as Democratic bosses, but a few Republican bosses in Pennsylvania and New York.
Yeah, they were very influential in public, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, southern states, Texas, throughout the Midwest.
Is there an echo of Huey Long here? I mean, it's right around the same time? He's a little bit earlier.
A little bit earlier. I think he was dead by the time this film. I think he was assassinated in 1935. But
that seems like that kind of.
Yeah.
I see a question has come up here regarding filibusters. How to compare it to the real thing, and can it possibly be used in the contemporary situation, particularly with respect to the more recent Supreme Court nominee? The answer is the filibuster portrayed in Mr. Smith was based upon actual filibusters that had transpired a few years earlier. The filibuster was used quite a lot through that period of time and well after World War II, really up into the 1960s, to obstruct principally civil rights legislation and anti-lynching legislation. And there were senators who held the floor for long periods of time. Strom Thurmond held the record more than 24 hours filibustering against the civil rights bill. But those were political theater. Today, the filibuster is still somewhat alive and well. It was amended in the 1970s. The Senate rules changed. Remember, this is not a constitutional provision. This is strictly Senate rules. The Senate amended the rule when the Senate was controlled by Democrats because the filibuster was being used to obstruct Obama's court appointees to the federal courts. Then 4 years after that, it was amended again to prevent filibustering for Supreme Court nominees. So right now, all federal court nominees and Supreme Court nominees need only be approved by a 50% plus one vote of the US Senate in terms of their advice and consent. The filibuster does still exist for any other items of legislation. The current filibuster rule is that it will require a 3/5, that is 60% vote of the Senate to invoke cloture. That means the closing of debate and move to a vote. That's hard to achieve. So mostly what happens is that a senator who objects to legislation can simply indicate that they will invoke a filibuster, which as a practical matter says that any legislation other than what I just noted would require a 60% vote of the Senate. That is likely to be changed regardless of the outcome of the Senate. I think everybody's fed up with it, Republicans and Democrats alike. My prognostication is that within a few years, the filibuster rule, that 60% rule, will be done away with, and the Senate will return back to majoritarian rule for everything.
Interesting to me was looking at the top 10 filibusters since 1900. And it's true that Southerners used it frequently, either overtly or covertly. If you try to enact this legislation, we're going to filibuster against it, which caused the leadership to take it off the agenda. So Thurmond does hold the record, although I've heard it questioned that he wasn't there the entire time, that other senators would say, would the gentleman yield for a question? And the question would run 20 minutes or 30 minutes while Thurmond answered the call of nature and had a sandwich or whatever.
Also, there were group filibusters where
Right.
one would yield to another, the longest being prior to the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
Right.
That filibuster went on for 60 days.
Yeah, that was a group effort. Wayne Morse from Oregon, 1950s, had a long filibuster. I think his was 17 or 18 hours, something like that. More recently, interestingly enough, Ted Cruz at 2013, and he talked and read, I think, children's books, as I recall, because your filibuster doesn't have to be, it's supposed to be germane to the topic, but oftentimes isn't. His went for 21 hours or so. And Merkley from Oregon attempted to filibuster against Judge Kavanaugh, and I think they invoked cloture against 13 or 14 hours, something like that. So I wonder, given the fact that you've got Republicans, few Republicans on the filibuster side, I'm wondering whether they might like to find that a useful tool from time to time, and therefore be no change in the rules.
Well, the argument for a filibuster is that somebody on the basis of principle can stall or hold up hold hostage, if you will, the rule of the majority in order to make their point. But their point is obstructionist. They're not going to win. They will delay and obstruct to the best they can, and it defeats the purpose of the legislative body. Ken White, I see in Q&A, said it was interesting to see the authorities turn hoses on the marchers. Yeah, that's the power of a dominant of dominant politics, and also the power of the police to suppress dissent. You know, now I have a lot of respect for the cops, but you know, the cops have three purposes. One is criminal investigation and law enforcement in that regard. The second is you know, they're first responders, but the third and responsibility of the police is that one thing we shouldn't forget is to control and suppress political dissent, and they do that not only in this country, and we can see many instances of that, but in most other countries. So the police of late are we applaud them for increasing professionalism and adherence to rules and procedure and the rights of accused, but professionalism also turns the participants inward looking, so they become more isolated from society. So it's a two-way street, and you can see the suppression of dissent in Mr. Smith, and we even saw it to the extent that they that the political machine launched, you know, strong arm. I call them toughs, but they're you know, criminal elements that actively interfered with the press, injured the boys, and yeah, they're harbingers of that then and now.
Although I have to say, you know, one thing, I'm teaching a class on comedy, and so we've been watching a lot of silent films. And one of the things that kind of, you know, again, films you've seen a dozen times and don't notice it, but looking at Chaplin, looking at Keaton, looking at you know, Laurel and Hardy, in all of these kind of silent and early sound films, the cops are always the bad guy. You know, there's a cop on the beat, and he's gonna get, you know, you're running away from him for something. I mean, you're always guilty of something too, which is interesting. It may not be something terrible, but there's this very kind of odd relationship between, you know, like it seems like there's this kind of moment that, you know, if we move into an idealization of the police, maybe in film noir we get, you know, police and technology that solve all kinds of crimes. And with the Cold War, we get you know, those kinds of ideas about police keeping order and all of that kind of stuff, or police as first responders, whatever. But this early was very much that they're, you know, they're in your neighborhood, they're walking the beat, and you just kind of stay away from them and you try to stay out of trouble. And it's always played for laughs. But it is kind of interesting that, you know, there could be any number of people that could function as this kind of, you know, laughable villain, and instead it's always the beat cop.
So I have a question for Larry. Larry, you need to teach a course on film and politics. Is this amongst your favorite political films? And what others would you rate among the top 5?
I've seen it.
No, this is not one of my favorites. Somebody who called it dated and sappy. I might even subscribe to a little bit of that. One of my favorites is Advise and Consent, based upon novel of the same name. I thought that is excellent. The themes of that movie combine all kinds. Not only is it portrayed as this film is in the U.S. Senate, and I'm not sure, but I think it may have actually been filmed on the floor of the Senate. But back in its day, I forgot the year of the film, but it's been
57, 58.
yeah.
Like
But
that.
it was an interesting portrayal of LGBTQ scandals back in the day, and presidential succession, and it was just. I think the themes of that film, as far as I was concerned, in politics and film, was in my mind, one of my favorites.
Yep. I especially liked Charles Lawton as Seabright Cooley.
Right. Well, yes.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, though, Larry, it seems to me that that film, in today's terms, and even Mr. Smith, neither of them really represent what the Senate is like these days. It gives you a very
Well, not these days. No, I mean
no. So I think if people came away with that impression, they'd be very much off base.
Yeah, no, the Senate in those days was portrayed as much more of a collegial body, not so fractious. Other films I've been thinking back that I like, The Candidate that starred Robert Redford is one of them. I also like used in that course documentary films. Let's see, one documentary film I always concluded the course with was Shoah, SHOAH, who deals with the Holocaust. It didn't show all 19 hours of it. I excerpted about 2.5 hours of it. And I always led off the course with the John Hurt's film 1984, the film portrayal of the classic book on the subject. I thought that film was particularly well done. I guess I tend to favor somewhat dystopian films.
You taught, you did a seminar, a post-film discussion on Dr. Strangelove a few years back when we showed that state.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
To Arnold's point, Capra supported the little guy until he became a mob, which I would understand that. Donna Riley has a question. What do you see as the most relevant current political film?
Wow.
Joker.
Joker. Could be.
Well, let's see. I'm not sure one would characterize this as a political film. As I said, I tend to like and favor dystopian type themes. So Handmaid's Tale has some interesting aspects to it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I would pick. I'm still a big fan of the Manchurian Candidate. The original one.
The original one, yes.
The original one, which I think is just an exceptional.
Frank Sinatra starred in that.
Yes, he did. Yeah, and Lawrence Harvey and great cast.
Donna responded to your response that she said Handmaid's Tale is fabulous. So thank you for that. Another question I have here is one film critic says the film was one of several that served to launch a genre of conspiracy films in the post-World War II era. Is there any evidence of that assertion?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, is there any evidence that there were really conspiracies? Is
Randy,
that what is it?
Doesn't that raise the possibilities that, after Smith wins this small victory, things will return to normal and corruption will be the norm? And sorry, folks, that's the way the world works. And many of the post-World War II films are seeped in that genre. The individual is not going to have, you think about film noir, for example, the poor schlep is never going to beat the cops, the bad guys, the good guys, what have you. And again, some of the nuclear films of the 50s and 60s, similar kinds of themes.
The political parties were not explicitly depicted in the film. Do either of you know why Capra chose not to do that?
My guess is he wanted to emphasize what he viewed as the larger issues, the larger moral issues, and not so much the political parties. I mean, you really, I don't think the words Democrat or Republican are uttered in the film. And you don't.
That's right, it isn't.
No, you don't, and you don't really get a sense of which side the senators are on. Interestingly enough, the bill that he introduced to create the boys' camp, sorry, girls do not apply to the camp, is a bill that could have originated.
Not in the Senate, no.
No, probably, but would it have originated from the Republican side of the aisle in the 1930s, or even today?
Well, remember, Smith is proposing that his proposed boys' camp be funded by solicitation of private donations in order, in effect, paying back the Treasury. That's not a proper funding mechanism. And it also funding has to start in the House of Representatives, not in the Senate. So those are minor details.
But it's, it's the concept of,
Yeah.
it's an opportunity.
He was filibustering, you see. Let's see what I forgot the term that they use in it. A deficiency bill, or something.
Yes,
which would be a supplemental funding for prior legislation, and so he was holding up. It was as if you were today trying to hold up, say, a routine extension of the debt ceiling, or something of that sort that would just obstruct ongoing functions of government.
But just the concept of a camp where you could mold little minds into
Bundescamp.
Yeah. Outdoors.
One thing that struck me about the political parties and their absence here again goes back to that notion of populism. And one thing that I kept looking at is the actor that plays the Senate leader that allows all of this to go on looks a lot like Will Rogers.
Yeah.
And I don't know that was accidental. And I mean, if you think about who's like the quintessential, there's Woody Guthrie and there's Will Rogers, and that's American populism. And I thought that was an interesting kind of a thing. I've looked at the actor and I've seen other pictures of him, and he doesn't really look that way. But the way they do it in this, he really has that. He has like an aw shucks kind of a posture, and it's just very interesting.
Yeah, that's why Capra picked him, I think, although he wasn't the first choice. The first choice didn't want it because he thought the role was too minuscule.
Yeah.
Had 21 or 22 lines. And lo and behold,
it's a great, it's a perfect example of there are no small roles. There are only
that's right. And that was Capra's philosophy too. There were no roles in his film, which is why he was careful in his casting, and claims to have interviewed everyone in the film, although that's hard to believe that he sat down with 96 senators.
A lot of people, yeah.
Yes, right.
I loved watching the president of the Senate's face, how he kept kind of like doing this because he was encouraging him, but yet was feeling for him. And he's kind of like you got this,
Yeah, and he's not allowed to do that, of course. He's supposed to.
Nor are you allowed to signal from the balcony.
Yeah.
No, none of that.
Look at Rule 22.
Well, let's see. There was a question that came up here under chat. Oh, something mostly dealing with graft and money in politics. Yeah, there's a lot of money in politics. Just take a look at them. If you haven't voted yet, I urge you to take a look at a particular website, which I find very useful. It's called ballotpedia.com. Ballotpedia, all one word. And that is an interesting compilation of all relevant information regarding candidates and propositions. But one thing you can take a look at is the amount of money and who's spending that money on the various propositions, pro or con. Yeah, it matters. See, elections matter. Winning matters. Yeah. And it's no joke. People are putting money in for their own interest. Graft does not occur explicitly as shown in Mr. Smith, certainly not anywhere near as much today as it perhaps did in prior years. But yeah, there is graft to be obtained. If one has inside information, inside trading, to use a Wall Street kind of term, advanced information, if you know what's going to happen with the placement of a highway or a dam or something like that, and you know that information and nobody else does, and you buy property along the right of way in advance and sell it for a pretty penny, that's a traditional form of graft. That's what is depicted in Mr. Smith. That's what Smith was accused of self-dealing. Of course, it was the political machine, Taylor's machine, that was conducting the graft. And
one thing that strikes me about the film is generally when we think about, I mean, and this is, you know, going back to, I mean, just a kind of a long-term trope really from classicism is that cities are corrupt and the country is noble, you know. In other words, you know, whether it's Athens, whether it's Rome, whether it's London, you know, the idea that you know, people are originally born, you know, ethical, and then they get into civilization and it corrupts them. The Rousseau and the idea of the noble savage, and certainly the kind of graft that we're talking about, the kind of corruption, whether it's in film noir or other kinds of things, always has an urban take on it. And this is actually not urban. I mean, the only urban part of it is Washington, which is not really played as a city. It's played as a historical locus, you know, an ideological location. But, you know, here we don't have urban corruption, which I think would be connected more to whether it's ethnic or whether it's organized crime, or whether it's, in other words, however we wanted to kind of think about, you know, the kind of corruption that we will see 10 years later in film noir, you know, that kind of thing. This is rural corruption, which is really kind of interesting. These are all rural states, rural gentlemen, and the land is rural.
But there are special interests there. There are big mining interests in Montana. Is a lot of
you know, you can go on to local websites for Ballotpedia and just take a look at, or you can go on the Secretary of State's website, and you can look at political donations to various candidates and specifically, and to proposition campaign committees. And there are hundreds of thousands of dollars, even local judgeship that's up for an election in Stanislaus County. Look at the amount of money that's in that campaign and who's putting up that money.
For the mayor's race.
It matters. You know, people, they're not spending that money for no good reason. Winning matters.
I mean, in terms of Mr. Smith, I guess what I'm thinking is that when we think about when we think about America in this kind of naive manifest destiny kind of way, we think about open spaces and we think about rural areas, and we assume that they're going to be ethical, as opposed to when we think of cities, we just kind of assume that they're going to be corrupt. And this seems to kind of flip that on its head in an interesting way.
Well, cities assert are the source of immigration, the others, the teeming masses, the centers of you know, business and industry, and the potentially corrupt practices that go along with those.
Well, Larry, there's a question that just came up. It says, this film helps answer how lawmakers often come into office as middle class, but leave office as multimillionaires. Do you see this kind of self-serving graft, Ukraine's Burisma group board seats, LOL, evident today?
Well, I guess my answer is no. I don't think the explicit type of graft that is depicted in this film, and people coming in as middle class, living millionaires, occurs very often. I think people in our national politics, they come in as millionaires and they stay as millionaires and they leave as millionaires. It takes a lot of money in order to subsist and conduct a political campaign. Now, so that is, but on the other hand, that while I think I don't think they personally enrich themselves. You take a look at the Clintons, for instance. Clinton left the presidency. He was not a wealthy man. Later on, they get a lot of money, go on a speech circuit, write a book, get the advance on it. Yeah, they're millionaires now because of that. Obama's in the same position.
Become a consultant.
They're making their money after they leave office, and not while they are in office, and certainly not by graft. But there are many other avenues for enrichment, and they take advantage of it. I don't begrudge them for that. It's part and parcel of part of our economy and capitalism.
So are there any politicians who, like Jeff, are driven by a desire to defend the Constitution and promote justice for the good of all people? Is there a reason to be skeptical about politics, as most people are?
Well, perhaps I'm a bit naive myself, but I give the benefit of the doubt to most politicians that they have a sincere adherence to the Constitution and to the laws of our land. I severely disagree with many of them regarding public policy and how they interpret that Constitution. But I think I'll give the benefit of the doubt. I think most politicians are well-meaning, and you can label me a bit naive in that regard. But I respect. That's why I'm not a politician. I respect them. That is a tough line of work.
We had a bit of a debate before the show began tonight on whether we'd rather be governed by Mr. Smith or by the Paynes and Taylors of the world. And I think you conceded that you'd rather be governed by the Paynes and Taylors of the world.
At least they're going to make the trains run on time.
That's right. I mean, and they were interested in compromise. I mean, here you've got Smith, who's a no compromise guy, and who doesn't understand the lessons of Abraham Lincoln.
Oh yeah. The political machine. Taylor was quite willing to buy Smith off and compromise and trade off, and the kind of trade off wouldn't have hurt Smith very much. All he had to do is move his boys' camp somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah. And then the comment was made: was Joe Biden's dad a milk delivery? Is that true?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's always nice to have that in your campaign.
Right.
Along with $50 million, like the Democratic candidate in South Carolina running for senator.
So Harry Carey got Best Supporting Actor nominee for his great little.
He had great facial expressions with very few lines.
Right.
Go back and look at some of his old cowboy movies.
He seemed like he was destined for Westerns.
Yes. Yeah, he has that kind of face.
Good. Does anyone else have any other questions? Or do you guys want to just keep chatting? Or what are your there's another question. Hold on. Ken White said, I'm reading 5 came back. Shortly after Mr. Smith came out, Capra began work with the Signal Corp to make propaganda films for the government about the war.
So Arnold, that's your bailiwick.
Yeah, you know, the one thing that I've watched a number of those films, and they're all available on YouTube, and they're worth watching. The one thing that, and I don't have an answer to this, which is why I didn't raise it as a question, but I was wondering about the representations of people of color in the film. There's only a couple of black guys, and they're basically porters. They're not exactly played for comedy. There's a little bit, so they're not huge stereotypes, but they're at least partially stereotypes. And yet Capra in Why We Fight made a specific film addressed to the African American audience, saying, you know, America's, you know, this is what America means to you, and it's a very strange. You know, we're in a segregated army. It's Jim Crow. I mean, it's a, you know, they realize they have to do this, and the army is asking him to do this. Like, you know, we want this to happen. So it's very vexing. And you think of other Capra films, and there really aren't. And I mean, it isn't only Capra. If you look at films of the period, there aren't other black actors, and when they are in something, they're maids or they're bartenders, and they're played for comic relief. But certainly the idea of you know, the status of people of color in the film is something that caught my eye when I you know, when I watched it again.
Yeah, I would say that's fairly typical of, as you said, films of the era. It's also interesting, you know, part of the reason the Army was interested in recruiting more black soldiers was they were running out of white soldiers to send to the front, and they began to lower the standards for white soldiers, the number of teeth they could have, and childhood diseases, etc., and really scraping among the white segment of the population, running out of troops. So they had to convince African Americans that this was a worthy cause. That's not to say that they were totally cynical here, but it was a factor if you read some of the history of that era. So do you think, though, in making those films and actually making Mr. Smith, that he was enabling America's participation in World War II?
In this film, this early part?
In Smith, and then the subsequent films that he made.
I think he's certainly kind of in favor of the ideology. It's tricky to say enabling. I mean, I've read some stuff, people talking about Casablanca as a film that changes people's position on the war, that, you know, the main characters are neutral, and by the end of the movie, they're not neutral. And we as the audience, of course, identify with them, and we're supposed to kind of change our position. I don't necessarily feel that here. And I thought it was interesting, and I know, Randy, you talked about this in the preview intro about, and I had read it as well, that this was a hugely popular. First, people were afraid that overseas that audiences would see this as anti-American, and yet when France was being closed off to U.S. films, it was a film that was very popular. I read somewhere that it played for like 39 hours in a row. So there is, I think there's an idea that we think about propaganda as saying good things about somebody, but I think if you can say bad things about somebody and be optimistic about it, or have a basis for reform, that in effect is more believable and more credible and more convincing. So yeah, I think ideologically this does support, you know, the war, but it's I mean, this is way too early. This, you know, I mean, the thing that struck me, which I thought was funny, was the moment when he says there are two members of dictatorial governments in the audience watching something here that they can't possibly see at home. And I'm sure they're thinking, because I was thinking it could be Franco, but I think it's Mussolini and Hitler at this point. So there's all of that.
Yeah, I think Franco banned the film, and I think Stalin banned the film as well.
Yeah, and we always, when we think about, you know, what films to watch, that's the first thing I do. I go to Rotten Tomatoes and then I see what Stalin liked. If he didn't like it, I'm not.
But he watched it. His personal screening room.
Yeah. And just to put it together, Stalin, if you haven't seen that, very funny.
Yes. Yeah, I was Stalin's projectionist. Isn't that the name of that?
Yeah. We got one more question. Hold on, it's going away now. Oh, it's a chat. Hold on, sorry. It says Frank Capra self-identified as a member of the Republican Party during a time of FDR domination. How does his messaging in movie themes and scripts comport with his political orientation, or was he simply driven by a common pro-patriotism attitude of the day?
One of the things that people have talked about with this is that his screenwriters tended to be left of center. And he knew a good screenplay when he saw it, and he kind of put his kind of political position, on hold a little bit, and then went with what he saw was going to be popular and successful. But that, like I said, I've come across that. I don't know what others think about that.
It's a business. And he was very successful at what he did.
Yeah.
Larry, do you have any thoughts on that one?
No, I guess I'll pass on this one. I don't. I'm not at all familiar with Capra's politics and his motives for his films. Most I knew about him was Mr. Smith and the Why We Fight series of World War II propaganda films.
Yeah, there is a new biography out, and Randy and I had talked about this earlier, that does link him to the McCarthy hearings and some of those House Un-American Activity hearings and things like that. So there, he is certainly conservative in that way. And, if we think about him and John Wayne on one side and, Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart on the other side, very, very different kinds of actors and different kind of politics. But I do think it's really interesting that the films pull away from that. At the same time, his targets are not political. Which political party is openly in favor of corruption? Which political party is openly in favor of, big bankers throwing little old ladies out in the street in It's a Wonderful Life. So, I mean, there is a way that he's, by picking targets that are big and kind of universal, he really is able to skirt the politics in ways that I think are different than what we see in, say, Preston Sturges's films, where, the politics are more on his sleeve.
Well, as I point out, I think Capra, in his own mind, I'll read into it, something of a red, white, and blue patriot.
Yeah.
I point out in the preliminary briefing there, the concept of American exceptionalism. He really drives that home with Jeff Smith and Smith's adoration and just amazement as he visits Washington for the first time, and all these icons and venues and landmarks and symbolism of America, and the goodness and the rightness and the triumph of Americanism. He really drives that point home.
Yeah, I have to say,
political science is called American exceptionalism.
Yeah, Larry, when you'd mentioned that, one of the things that struck me as a Briticist is how the Brits did that in the 19th century. When you read about starting with really, the mid-Victorian period when, colonialism is a good thing, and, before the Crimean War and the Boer War, there's very much this idea of Britain as, British exceptionalism. And I mean, it goes back even to, to the, I don't want to say the medieval period, but the early modern period, where, France and Spain and those places didn't have the Brits had trial by jury, they had habeas corpus, they had the Magna Carta, they had certain things that were, legal base, rule of law, and they kind of play that up, and you see it in Shakespeare, but you do see it particularly in the 19th century. So it's funny to see, America pick up on it, because I suspect, I don't know French politics that well, but I suspect if we started to look at other countries, there would be a lot of different exceptionalisms that are out there.
I'll show that Ken White made a comment that screenwriter Sidney Buckman was an avowed communist.
Yeah. See, I think that's part of where Capra's, coming from. In other words, the writing there is, is coming from left of center.
The avowed communist shouldn't be equated with our current conception of communists and communism. I it would be more acquainted with the purest ideals of socialism.
Yeah.
All right.
1930s, 30s
Well,
brand.
I want to say a big thank you to Randy, Arnold, and Larry. Appreciate the time you put into this. It was
Right.
very enjoyable. Like I said, I'll be sending out a survey. We're launching the election movie on the 16th, which is next Monday, and we'll doing a chat on the 26th, which is the week after on a Monday. Again, we've got popcorn sales every Friday night, drive-in movies every Saturday. A lot going on in the state theater world. We've got a concert, like I mentioned, Flying Blind concert is on October 29th. And I'd love to see you all very soon, whether it be popcorn or a concert or a drive-in. And thank you for your input and your great questions.
Check out election. I'm really interested in hearing your feedback on that.
And
Yeah.
I should point out, it is R-rated for people who are sensitive.
What's it rated for, Randy?
Pardon?
What's it R-rated for? Language?
A little of that,
Language.
a little behavior,
They don't give our ratings for politics.
a bit of sex, although less sex than is in the book, at least according to Alexander Payne, its director.
And how old is Reese Witherspoon when it was
23.
23? Oh my.
Yes.
Was it
Wasn't
one
her
of her
first film, wasn't her first film, but very close to her first and clearly a breakout film for her.
Interesting. Larry, can you name the website that we should be looking at again, please?
Yeah, I'm putting it into chat right now.
Okay, perfect.
So the other one, Larry, is Center for Responsive Politics, that has the breakdown by zip codes of contributors. Every once in a while, I think I look at that one, and it's kind of fun to go to your own zip code and see who's giving in presidential races to whom.
Interesting.
Yeah, if anybody's making political donations, I think any donation over $200, I think is the limit, is public information.
Good to know.
Randy, do you have chat available to you? Can you put the URL of that website you just referred
Yes,
to?
I will do that.
And Jeff Vanguard just said, great job, everyone. Thank you. And Larry posted that. And Randy's going to post his website.
He hopes.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Hope
you.
Hope
Awesome.
to see you for the election.
We'll see
All
you
right.